Hey bros, welcome to the Steroid Journals. This is a video series where I go over my step-by-step involvement with anabolic steroids. Everything from being curious about them, to researching them, to buying them, to using them, what the results were, everything after that, and everything in between. Where we left off in the previous video, I had just purchased my first cycle. I learned only after that about PCT, post-cycle therapy, and I should really have that shit to go as soon as I start my cycle, as well as ancillaries to minimize the side effects. So I gathered all the stuff up, bought the needles too, didn't realize that I needed to buy needles separately, bought all of the shit, and it finally all arrived just as my foot was finally just about healed, and so I was ready to start my cycle. I was pretty fucking excited. Then I realized at this point that I didn't actually know how to inject. I watched a ton of videos about it, so I guess I knew how to do it, but I was still nervous as hell. I talked to my buddy who's a bodybuilder about it, and he was like, well, the best place to inject is the VG, the ventral gluteal, your ass, basically. And I was like, there's no way I can do that though, because I can't do it myself. I can't reach back there, and I can't get anybody to do it for me. Nobody knows that I'm doing this except you, and you live in a different state. That's just not a possibility. So I looked up some other injection sites that people typically use. One of those is the quad. So I figured I can reach my quad just fine. That's probably what I'm going to do. So I looked at tons of videos, tons of pictures, like diagrams about how to do it. I felt like I was comfortable finally. So my first injection, well, I went through all the steps that you're supposed to go through. I sterilized the top of the vial, because in case you didn't know this, the top of the vial doesn't like have a lid on it or whatever. It's got like this rubber stopper, and you stick the needle through the rubber stopper in order to pull the liquid out. But you got to sterilize the top of that every single time. Well, I had two vials because I was doing 1 milliliter of testosterone enanthate and 1 milliliter of DECA. I sterilized the top of both of those vials. Then you want to go ahead and use your thicker, smaller gauge needle. It's usually the one that's already attached to the syringe, to pull the oil out. And I did not know what I was doing at all. I've never done this before, so I didn't understand why it was taking so long to get that oil out. Here I am pulling on the thing and it's not working. It was a lot of trial and error as far as that went. Eventually, when I had 1 cc of the Testi, I then went ahead and pulled 1 cc of the DECA, and eventually when I had both, then you go ahead and you sterilize your injection site. Now, like I said, I decided I was going to do my quad, and every fucking diagram I looked at, I shit you not, it looks like what they're trying to tell you to do is they draw this big rectangle on the top of your quad with an X. And I figure X marks the spot, right? So that must be where you're supposed to go ahead and inject into. Not the case, but we'll get to that in a bit. So yeah, after I sterilized the injection area, I went ahead and switched out needles for the bigger gauge one, which has the smaller, thinner needle. Then I went ahead and stuck it in, and it didn't hurt. In fact, I could barely tell that it was going in there at all. I was really surprised. I was honestly very nervous about how bad it might hurt or how weird it would feel, but it was perfectly normal feeling. It was fine. The next step is aspirating, and that's pulling back on the plunger of the syringe to see if you can pull any blood into the syringe. And if you can, that means you're in a vein and you're going to want to pull the needle out, choose a different injection spot, and start the whole process over again. But 99% of the time, you're not going to pull any blood in. That means you're good to go. The problem with aspirating, though, is that it's not backed up by the medical field. No doctors or nurses ever aspirate if they're doing muscular injections, because they don't feel like it makes any sense. You can't really get into a vein. The veins in the particular injection spots that you're choosing these particular places because they don't have a lot of veins. There aren't a lot of thick veins in those areas to inject into, and anyways, even if there were, the small size of the needle that you're using is just going to go right through it because it's a 1-inch needle, and you'd have to try really hard to aim that into a vein and keep it in a vein. The medical community doesn't back up aspirating. They've put out a thing a few years back saying that they don't recommend it for any type of muscular injections. It's just really the bodybuilder bros that seem to continue to do it because they feel like they've got to, I guess. There's no harm in doing it, except it can increase PIP. We'll get to PIP in a bit. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and aspirate regardless. And that is a little nerve-wracking because I'm trying to hold the needles still, but then also pull back on the plunger and not move it around too much, because the more you move it around, the worse your post-injection pain is going to be. PIP stands for post-injection pain. Because your body is not used to you sticking a needle into your quad, the next day you're going to feel it. It's just like when you go and get a flu shot in your shoulder. You're not used to getting shots in your shoulder, so you feel it the next day. So PIP can be minimized by repeatedly injecting into that particular muscle tissue. Eventually your body gets used to it, and it can also be minimized by not aspirating. But again, I had chosen to go ahead and continue aspirating just for that one extra little bit of peace of mind about not getting into a vein. A lot of people have this misunderstanding about injecting steroids out there in the world at large, thinking you are injecting into a vein, and of course you're not. You're injecting into muscle tissue. That's also why there's some people out there like, oh, well, injecting steroids is dangerous because you could inject an air bubble into one of your veins and that could kill you. And that's not possible. You can't get enough air into one of those little syringes to cause any kind of damage like that. It's not possible, and you can't even really get that into a vein because of the shape of the needle. Regardless, post-injection pain, I definitely felt it for an entire week after I went ahead and injected, and that turned out to be my fault because I was injecting in the complete wrong part of the quad. Again, I saw these diagrams that had these rectangles on top of the quad with an X, and I'm thinking X marks the spot. I want to inject anywhere within this rectangle. Turns out no, what those diagrams are trying to tell you is do not inject into this rectangular area. Instead, you want to be injecting on the outside of your quad, not the inside, not on top of, but the outside. So my first 2 injections, I was doing it on the top of my quad, which was a terrible idea because that's an important muscle used for walking, and I could barely walk for like 2 weeks because of that. But by my 3rd injection, I had finally read enough stuff to understand where I was really supposed to be injecting, but I still made some pretty funny mistakes anyways. I still didn't understand that you've got to hold back on the syringe really slowly to get the oil into the syringe. So one time, I think it was my 3rd injection, I pulled the plunger back so fast that it pulled completely out of the syringe, and then all of the oil went flying everywhere on me, on my floor. So that's one dose I'm not getting. But by my 4th injection, I was finally on top of things and was doing okay. So that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about what my results were 4 weeks into my cycle, and they were pretty impressive. Just only 4 weeks in, I was pretty stoked. We'll talk about that in the next video. See you bros then. Bye.